Hey everybody, it's been a while. Welcome back, or otherwise welcome to the channel. My name is Fable. This will be a controller-centered guide for people who are new to controllers, or want to switch to using a controller, or people who want tips for using them. A little background for me is that I've been a Final Fantasy XIV player since approximately forever now, and all this time I've used a controller for gameplay, videos, and other stuff. The tips I have for you in this video are from my own experience. You can find many more online, but the ones listed here are the ones I've found the most crucial and useful. This guide will be split into a few sections, so that if you're looking for something specific, you can head straight there from these time marks. But be careful, you might miss something we set up earlier. First, I'd like to talk about the pros versus cons of using a controller versus keyboard and mouse. On the pros side, your hands are closer together, meaning your brain is coordinating much better. It's actual science, go look it up. The closer your hands are, the better coordinated you are. I didn't make it up. Mobility and ability usage are now entirely separate buttons, allowing you to move and cast spells fluently. Even if you forget your spell rotation, after a while using certain classes is like muscle memory and impossible to forget. No bloated screen usage with all those crazy hotbars that take up massive amounts of space. Final Fantasy XIV is super controller friendly considering the PlayStation entry. Classes like Ninja or Machinist benefit incredibly from the controller hotbar setups. On the con side, if you're on a console, writing crafting or long queued macros is out of the picture. You'll dread them. The PC Master Race brats will pop up, just ignore them. You're above judging people for what they use to play a game. Without a good hotbar rotation setup, scrolling through hotbars can get messy as hell. If you've got a placement without using a macro, it can be a little awful to use. Luckily, a few classes have these. Plus, I will be showing you a macro later on that'll take care of this. Overall, playing with a controller has vastly improved my experience playing the game, and hopefully this guide will improve yours too, or even convince you to give controllers a shot. So without further ado, let's get into the nitty-gritty. First up, let's talk controllers themselves. I know there's a few ways to hook up a PlayStation controller to your PC, but I have no knowledge of that, so I can't help you there. But I know there's several videos online that'll cover that for you. Xbox controller users have it easy. They just have to plug in the thing and boom, there you go. This guide works for PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, and Xbox One controllers and everything else that basically connects with USB or Bluetooth. That being said, the button layout for controllers should not change unless you've got some Frankenstein creature of a controller. I will preface this by saying I will be mostly using the Xbox buttons to explain things because that's how I've played for years, but I will have a graphic on at times for you Sony lads. Now let's take a look at the creature itself. The hotbars we controller users will refer to as crossbars, or otherwise known as X-bars, or key bars if you're into that. Now this is what they look like, and this is a little easy to use mock-up I made to help us understand it a little bit better. You might be wondering to yourself, my controller has like the letters and the D-pad though? Let's dissect it. This is one half of the crossbar. Effectively, with the button layout on, this is what it looked like. You may have noticed that the LT-R2 or the You may have noticed the LT-L2 or the RT-R2 there. Basically, the crossbar is divided into two, and you activate each side by pressing either the LT-L2 or the RT-R2. For example, if I press LT-L2, this side becomes active, while RT-R2 makes this side active. The abilities I have mapped to each corresponding button will activate depending on which side I have active. Don't worry too much about what is happening if we press LT, L2, and RT, R2 at once, we'll get into that later. God, that's difficult to say. But this is just one cross hotbar, right? What if we want more buttons? That's when we press our right bumper, or R1 for the Sony lads. We begin cycling through hotbars. You might think that this is a lot of bars to cycle through with 8 hotbars, but don't worry. We'll get around to the controller settings portion later. So then we get into setting up our hotbars. For explanation purposes, I've decided to go with the Machinist class in my setup for it since I think that's the easiest to understand. I just want to say that my hotbar setups are not for everyone. Experiment with what's comfortable for you. This portion is mostly to explain what ways there are to set up your hotbars, and how I've set mine up. So on the right side of my hotbars is where I keep my rotation. The reason for this is that I use my thumb to turn the camera on my right hand. I usually need to control the camera the least, so that's why I use it there. Fun little bonus by the way, if you press down the left thumbstick while you're targeting, it locks you onto that target and the camera will focus entirely on them, so you can run circles around things. Anyway, this is how I divided my first hotbar. On the RT-R2, we have the Machinist 1, 2, 3 rotation always set up on that side. This is usually where I keep my main buttons I press for a class. The fourth button I tend to keep a button which I just frequently have to press, like in this case Hotshot. On the left side I keep important buttons, like Hypercharge for the big damage buff for the team, Heartbreak so I can easily tap it whenever it's up, and Rapid Fire and Wildfire close to each other since they go hand in hand. On the LT-L2 side, I keep the buttons I have to frequently tap like Gauss Barrel. On this side I tend to keep off global cool stuff so I can quickly tap the them without having to switch from action buttons to directional button. And on the left hand side we have ammo, crit, and a heat manager. This is pretty simple, right? This might seem like a little bit of mumbo jumbo if you don't understand the machinist class, but just stick with me on this one. On the second crossbar, I just have the panic buttons, and aside of the buttons I have stuff I just rarely use actually. Cycling through hotbars can be a little bit messy, so I tend to keep all the important stuff on the first crossbar unless I play something like Warrior, where I don't need to keep my 1, 2, 3 rotation going all the time. Now I also have a third crossbar, and you'll notice that these mirror each other. The reason for this is because of the settings I have. If I press down the RT and R2 button and the LT if I press down RT and L2, I get what the game refers to as expanded controls. Really, it's just a selected section of a hotbar you selected in the settings. Personally, I'm a huge klutz, and for expanded controls, the game tells you to either press RT and L2 for one side and then vice versa for another. I don't need a whole nother hotbar, so in the end I just set up so that they both give me the same buttons and I don't need to keep in mind which order I press them in. Something I want to note is that Captain E just asked me on Twitter if a class like Ninja would be good to use in a controller. I'd venture a guess that the reason for this was actually because of the ninjutsu system. The expanded controls area is actually why I say yes, and it is incredibly easy to use. Here's my level 61 ninja, which as you can tell doesn't have all the abilities yet, but when I hold down both triggers at the same time, the ninjutsu bar comes up. Now I don't have Ninki unlocked yet, but once I do, I plan on putting those on the right side of my expanded controls so that they are easy to use. Hopefully that kind of answers your question, Aegis. Alright, now I've spoken about cycling through hotbars and expanded controls, but the useful stuff isn't enabled by default. First, set up your crossbar where you'd like to have it on your HUD. I won't show you how to do this, do it yourself, please. You know how to do this. Hold shift to move it on the grid though, because, you know, OCD. Secondly, go to character configuration and head down to the hotbar settings. Now, first tip, on display, grab a hotbar you don't use for anything else. For me, that's hotbar number 1, and make that 12 by 1 by, you know, just clicking on that. On the settings, my preferred on settings are display recast times, hide unassigned slots, and enable drag and drop on pet hotbar, display only the cross hotbar, and automatically replace. In the sharing tab, I leave 1, 2, and 3 turned off from sharing since I never use more than 3. And on the third one is the expanded controls anyway. It's also important that in normal hotbars, you turn off the sharing for the hotbar you selected earlier. We'll again get to why soon. For me, that's number 1. On the cross tab, we're going to run through this quickly. Enable the cross hotbar, which, you know, it should be on. If it's not, then, you know, do that now. And turn all of the settings on. Cross hotbar controls, I've had the most comfort with hold. I wouldn't recommend changing the display type. W cross hotbar, I don't touch that since in my experience has been nothing but a headache to figure out how to set up and use properly, so I wouldn't recommend touching it. Expanded controls hold is what I prefer personally. You could also use the second option of double tap, but I think that's just extra work in my opinion. I set up mine to work with cross hotbar 3 left and right, but since I mirror them, I don't really fiddle with it any further. You can set it up to one side if you want to control it like mine, it's up to you. On set location, disable auto hotbarring. The reason for this is sometimes a fight will sheath a weapon or a dungeon will, and your hotbar will jump all over the place, and it gets wonky. It's really icky. I enabled all my hotbars for cycling when sheathed. Now at this point, I'd like to mention empty hotbars are skipped in cycling through them, so don't worry about having to cycle through 8 of the damn things when, you know, you have your weapon sheathed, so, you know. Unless you have them all set up with cube macros and annoying emotes, then of course you're gonna have to cycle through them because there's something on them. When weapon is draw, aka in combat, I limit my hotbars to just be the first 3, so I don't randomly go to places I shouldn't be. Again, it doesn't cycle through hotbars that are empty, so if hotbar 2 is empty, like you see here, the cycle will skip it. As for PvP settings, I just didn't touch it, honestly. All the buttons fit on one crossbar, and it's, you know, not ideally set up as is, and you can change that, you know, as you want, but I don't PvP much as is, so that's for you to set up. And now on to tips. Tip number 1, if you're playing something like Summoner, Dark Knight, or say a Machinist, you will have something that needs placing, like Salted Earth, Shadowflare, or a turret. And it might be worth setting up a macro for this. I call this macro casting or macro placing, but it skips the annoying part where you had to hard cast where you want to put something. The macro looks like this, but replace the Shadowflare with the ability you'd like to have placed. M icon gives the ability of the icon you'd like to have macro cast, AC is the ability's name as the game writes it, with the angle brackets being the target. Putting in T means you'll cast it at what you're looking at and targeting. Enemy or ally, that's where you put it. I will have the macro down in the description. Tip number 2, remember the hotbar that I told you to set aside earlier? I call this the indicator or the proc bar. I tend to keep it above or below my crossbar. This is not a crossbar, this cannot be used, but it's a nice little visual indicator. On this bar I put cooldowns or buttons that proc like Rune 2 becoming Rune 4 for summoners if I'm not on that specific hotbar or watching something else. I tend to make this bar pretty big since I'm a big Dumbo and it helps me. Tip number 3, if you quickly want to rearrange your crossbars with buttons that are already on it, just press any of the triggers and use the select button. For PS4 users, I think this is the touchpad. And that's my guide on crossbars and controllers. Of course, this guide is just explaining how I personally use them, and don't take my word for gospel and try out some things yourself. I'm so dead set on my crossbar and my muscle memory with hotbars that whenever I see people with entirely different setups, I get irked because of how uninsightful it looks to me, but really, it's just because it's not my muscle memory. I hope this guide helped you, and if it did, please leave a like and subscribe. Join the Discord down below, and actually, I have another thing to announce. I now have a Patreon. I know that my content has been incredibly sporadic for a while now, and the reason for that is a somewhat turbulent living situation. I constantly have to do odd jobs and other tasks to make ends meet, and the stress from this combined with the time consumed hasn't let me work on videos as much as I'd like. So if you wish to help me out and lift the burden a little bit, please support my brand new Patreon page. My name is Fable, and I thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again very, very soon.